All right. So again, welcome everybody. My name is Lady Charlotte, and I'll be your host today for tonight's I Did a Thing, Trimaris Arts and Sciences live session. The IDAT series is all about sharing our knowledge and celebrating the amazing things that Trimaris and the known world creates, and building a growing library of educational resources that we can share online. Every class and webinar, we hope, records and helps preserve the skills and inspire future artisans. So today's session is going to be recorded so we can welcome to those joining us live and then also those who may be watching in the future. And today's very amazing presenter is, I'm so sorry if I mispronounce it, it's Aibhilin inghean Daibhidh. Was that okay?
Close. Aibhilin inghean Daibhidh.
Aibhilin inghean Daibhidh. It's like, oh, I didn't look up the Indian. Who was a renowned storyteller, bard, musician, and teacher known for her performances of period-inspired music and original bardic works celebrating the people and history of our society. She has lived and participated in Trimaris, Caid, Outlands, Ansteorra, and Drachenwald, performing at events throughout the known world, including most notably Gulf Wars and Pennsic. In recognition of her excellence and dedication to teaching and mentorship, she was elevated to the Order of the Laurel in the Kingdom of Trimaris in 2022. And so please welcome and join me in welcoming Mistress Aibhilin inghean Daibhidh. Yay! Thank you so much for being here with us tonight. I'm so excited.
Of course. So my preface before anything, Bardic basics is a very broad topic. So if you have any things you want to know or questions, please put it in the chat. This is really a completely nonlinear collection of random thoughts based on some of the various questions that were posed before this and other things that people mentioned to me. So there's not like a ton of cohesiveness. I wanted to be able to address what people are interested in, and we'll just kind of go from there. Let's see. Let me share my screen here. Sorry, I have 12,000 windows on my computer. There we go. Okay. So, yeah, Bardic Basics, a nonlinear collection of thoughts on SCA Bardic and historical music based on random questions that I was asked. That's what we're getting today. So first of all, what is Bardic? Or what is a bard? If you ask 1,000 people, you'll get 1,000 different answers. Bardic is ultimately an SCA construct that describes a subset of performing arts focused on song and story. All Bardic is performing arts, but not all performing arts is Bardic. But if you go many places in the known world, you will get some people who will refer to any performance, even a theatrical Shakespeare performance, as Bardic. A Shakespeare performance could be Bardic in some situations, like if you do a monologue at a Bardic circle, now Shakespeare is Bardic. But if you put on a whole 2-hour play, most people would classify that as performing arts theater, not performing arts Bardic. So we're looking at a subset. When we're talking about Bardic, we are usually talking about things that communicate a story in some way, from our time period or from the modern SCA. Generally, we are going to focus on these stories of modern society, stories of our society's history, and then stories that are about or inspired by history. But people who do Bardic are not generally focused on actual period works. We are looking more at the function of musicians in period. So in period, a musician's job was to tell the story of history. It was tell what was happening. It was to entertain people. So we are fulfilling a historical role, not necessarily only doing period specific performances. So it's kind of a broad net. you could absolutely do period performances as a bard, but there are a lot of different ways that we can kind of look at this package. Generally, bardic is kind of like anything that's performed in a circle or around a fire qualifies as bardic. And you are a bard if you decide you are a bard. There are some people that do performing arts that we would generally say is bardic, but they're like, oh, I'm not a bard. They might prefer to say they are a minstrel. They might just not at all want to claim the bard title. So that's why I say you're going to get a lot of different answers no matter who you ask. Our modern SCA bardic performance style that is centered around our bardic circles or our bardic fires tends to be heavily influenced by folk music more so than period music. Now, some folk music we can trace back far enough to say that probably maybe it started within period, but we don't have a lot of direct connections because a lot of this stuff was not written down in our period, so we don't necessarily have proof. There's a lot of influence from child ballads. There's a lot of influence from Irish trad and more of like the Irish revival that we hear commonly performed around in the SCA that are not actually period music. But these are influences to our modern SCA style. You'll hear a lot of the same stuff that you could hear at a Ren Fair is perfectly fine at an SCA Bardic Circle. So we are not period specific, but we do a period function as far as entertaining, telling stories of history, telling stories of our modern heroes, the same types of things that would be done by the epic storytellers in period. So where did we get the word bard? Bard is a historical thing. Bard is taken from Celtic cultures where they were the keepers of oral tradition. They would memorize vast amounts of works. They could be poets or sing songs. They would talk about the history. They would celebrate their chiefs and warriors. They would know the law and the religion and the genealogy, recite, all of the genealogy of the kings or the chiefs or whatever the case may be. So we took the word bard from this function, and we do a lot of these functions ourselves as bards in the SCA. But we are not necessarily being the bards that were from period culture, period Celtic cultures. So we have our historical aspects, but not necessarily fully period in everything that we are doing, but it is more of a function of society versus something completely out of context. So most of the time people think of bards and bardic and they think of music. I wanted to put a very strong caveat out here that music and singing is not required to be a bard. You could be a storyteller, you can be a poet. There are many ways to be a bard, but there was some questions concerning this class about music history and kind of period music and some stuff there. So we're going to touch a little bit on, okay, if bards aren't doing period music, how do I know? What is period music? How do I tell the difference? How do I know that someone is doing a period song versus a modern SCA song? What can I look for? So up front, every culture around the world has their own music, and what they were doing during this time period is going to be different based on where around the world they were. Not every culture wrote their music down in this time period, depending on where we are in the time period, and that often can give us a very Eurocentric view of music history when we are talking specifically about the society. Oral tradition, always more difficult to track down and prove that it belonged in period. But there are certainly a lot of oral traditions that are important and that was very strong around the world. So we have a lot of like Indian music in this time period. That's another area that I've studied. Nothing was written down in period at all, but we can still know what was period based on the strong oral tradition that they had in that time period. What you're going to see if you go to the Asian countries, if you go to China during this time period or Japan during this time period, you're going to see very different development of music, music history, music scales. So for the purposes of today, right now, we are going to just talk about some of the European music history that is usually what people are asking about when they're talking about music, period music in the SCA, since we did start with a Europe focus. But that is not to say that the other music history is not important, but trying to cover everything would be hours and hours. Okay, so some words that often get thrown around when we're talking about music and period music and historical music. Anything we're talking about in Europe, pretty much we got to talk about what they were doing in the church. Everyone is, for the most part, familiar with like chanting. This is what we would call a monophonic music style. We have one line of melody. Everybody is singing the same thing in one voice. A lot of what we are doing in the SCA when we have people performing songs is monophonic music. We are doing a single a cappella line of music. Now, if you go to a Bardic circle, you might get people starting to harmonize onto that. And now we are creating polyphonic music, which is where we have more than one line of melody or harmony going on. In medieval Europe, in the church, we started with this monophonic music, and there was a lot of what we would call plain chant or plain song. And there are many different styles of this across regions. What most people are most familiar with is the idea of Gregorian chant. And this was only one type of plain song that was standardized by Pope Gregory and is what ultimately spread across Europe to be the predominant chanting style. Doesn't mean that it was the only one. There are lots of other styles out there. This is just what the Pope liked, so, you know, we do what the Pope says. Now, an interesting note about history and about this monophonic versus polyphonic development is originally the church was very anti-polyphony. Like, monophonic music was the way to go, and it was not legal to do polyphonic music. So within the church, they're like really not about adding multiple lines. They didn't want to get into the harmony, polyphony, all that stuff. But in the 9th century, we did start to see some heterophonic music. So this is usually where there were same, like 2 lines. Instead of being like different moving harmonies, it was usually 2 people singing the same thing, just like a third or a fifth apart. These are different intervals that tell how many notes away on a scale the sounds are from each other. In this time period, 10th century, 11th century, 12th century, we loved fifths. So that means the melody and the harmony were 5 notes apart, or we would want to have like a 1 and a 5 being played in a background, and we would sing on top of that. So fifths as a concept are very important. So good to know a fifth.
Quick question.
Yes.
The song Gaudete, I know that's written in the 15th century supposedly, but is it considered polyphonic? Or would that be early polyphonic or no?
I mean, the way most people perform
Hmm.
it is polyphonic. I mean,
Hmm. That's what
just
I was thinking too.
sing it alone, then yes, you are singing it in a monophonic
Mhm.
style. I don't know offhand whether the original was written to contain harmony or not. Um, it's late enough in period that it's likely, but also they might have written down a melody and not written down the other parts. So I could look it up, I could do research for you, but I don't know offhand if the harmonies that we usually see performed with the well-known Gaudete are written in period or not. Uh,
Absolutely. Thank you. I love that one.
yeah, I mean, that's a great one. There are a lot of popular versions that usually involve some degree of harmony. Um, Usually by the time we've gotten to, you know, the late period, and this was, you know, more like 16th century, um, you would have more than one line going on. We were well into polyphony by then. So yeah, possibly it was written as all with harmony. Possibly people just did it and all they wrote down was one part. Just because we only wrote one thing down doesn't mean it wasn't performed with more. Like trouvère music is a good example of music that is performed in a different way than we've written it. We only wrote one line down, but more lines exist when we start looking at how it was actually performed. But what was important was the melody, whether you were going to sing a harmony on top of it or sing a drone with it. The melody is what most people were focused on notating. So our early polyphony really started with just like 2 lines. And then we would start adding more complex lines on top of the basic chant if we were in the church. Now, at the same time that the church is developing their polyphony, we also have secular music that is doing their own thing as well. So we're kind of getting our early polyphonic stuff, but we had other stuff going on as well. So depending on where you're at and whether you're in the church or not, there are a lot of different kind of common things you might hear thrown around in the SCA. And I really am just tried to put in here styles or songs or words that you're likely to hear pop up. This is by no means an exhaustive list. In some ways, it's just things that I like or that you'll hear me talk about. So in the early period, we've got in France and the South, we have trouvères and troubadours. This is 11th to the 14th century. Their core melodic lines were monophonic, but they would perform them in a way that added more of a polyphonic element, but they were not written polyphony. They didn't notate and create the song originally with multiple lines in mind, like some of these other styles. The same would go for on the religious side, like Cantigas de Santa Maria. These are very common monophonic lines of music, but that doesn't mean we perform them only in a monophonic way. We will perform both of these styles of music are commonly performed with a drone accompaniment or with an arpeggiated accompaniment. They could be sung with 2 singers in thirds or in fifths. So there's a lot of different variation that we would see on top of these monophonic melody lines that would enhance them and bring them closer to what we would get in as we start getting into more strict polyphony. When we start getting into more of the strict notated polyphony, some of the first things we see would be motets. These often started with like 3 lines of music, but we can have a motet with more lines than that. And this is kind of the beginning of some of these more complex melodic and rhythmic elements that we would start to see in songs in this time period. And then we kind of develop from there into one of the more common terms you might hear is ars nova. There's some really popular composers in the time period, 14th century, that were starting to write some really, really complex polyphonic pieces, both, mostly church music, but also outside of it as well. And then we start going further into the late Renaissance. We're starting to get into madrigals and chansons and lute songs and broadsides, and there's a lot of different music you're going to hear. So madrigals tend to be just 4 parts. Madrigals are very, very common throughout this time period. They tended to be pretty quick songs. There's lots of English madrigals out there. Chansons are like the French version of this, but you might hear a chanson talked about, so that's why I threw it in here. Most people are familiar with lute songs like John Dowland. So as we get later in the period, you hear a lot of like a single solo voice accompanied by a lute, creating different sounds. And then, yeah, we can have these broadside ballads. Yeah, the people of this time period did not necessarily write clean music. There is a lot of body music in this time period. At first glance, it sounds very child appropriate, but when you learn more about it, It is not. So fair warning for anyone exploring period music. You can end up in some interesting places. Um, so again, this is kind of like a brief little timeline of some of the most common terms you might hear thrown around, or if you're interested, here's some words you can go Google and go down a rabbit hole. As I see, each of these topics, I teach standalone 2-hour classes on True Bear music. So all of these could be their own classes. Please, I encourage you to Google them and, go down the rabbit hole yourself to kind of hear some of them. But I do believe in examples if it will actually let me play examples here. So we're going to see if the sound works. I think there's a setting I can adjust, but tell me if you're hearing this.
I heard it.
So this is the most common thing y'all have heard if you're talking about really old period music. This is your chanting. You can hear how everyone is singing the same thing at the same time with this. Oh, that's totally on this example list. Don't worry, Charlotte. So these pieces tended to be kind of slower in movement, but we can have some that are a little bit quicker, but they're intended to be sung by a lot of people. So when you're doing that, you're going to have a more free-form kind of flow. And you want a simple melody line that's easy for people to follow and sing along with. The range of these songs does not go very far. So you're not going to get something crazy like Golden, where you're seeing 3 octaves. So that's, and then we had some very common, this is one of the early talked about composers, Hildegard von Bingen. She was one of the first female composers that is well known to have written a lot of this early church music. And you can hear here, this song is being accompanied by a drone. So you have the melody, and then you've got the background is this low standalone pitch that's not changing. And here we're also adding in a second female voice that is adding some harmonies occasionally.
And now your sound is going in and out, Mr. Savalin, so I'm not sure. Are you sharing sound on your as you share screen?
It should be sharing the same way. Let me try resharing.
Okay. It seems like it's competing with your voice is the only thing, and I want to hear both.
Yeah, it's hard to do both.
Definitely.
Try.
Which for anybody who's tried Bardic virtually knows that to be true as well.
Let's see if it works better this time.
Perfect.
Were you still able to hear me over it when I talked? Can you hear me now, or am I totally gone?
We can hear you now.
Okay. So I probably can't talk at the same time. So, yeah, so underneath all of this, you can hear that drone note, which is going to be basically what the tonic of the song is. So a tonic or a 1, that's basically what area of sound we are in. All music has a scale of some kind, and we have a pitch that we want to kind of return to, and that's the tonic pitch. So that's going to create this kind of background vibe of where we are. We've got the solo voice singing this more kind of complicated melody, and then occasionally in this one, we have a second voice coming in and creating a little bit of polyphony. But if you listen to there, both female voices were moving the same direction at the same time. So that's when I said heterophonic, which is where we have two lines. That's kind of a stepping stone to get into polyphonic songs. That's what we're talking about, is like two voices moving at the same time. This is a very simple way to harmonize. If you know a song and your friend knows a song, you just kind of both sing the same thing, but you start on slightly different pitches, and that's going to create a very simple harmony that you can maintain throughout the entire song. Let me move on to the next example. Next I have a trouvère song. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit because it's got a big long intro. So here we have a single melody line being sung, but we are being accompanied by background instruments. So there were a couple different instruments you could use in this time period. So a pretty common one would be a harp of some kind, and you could accompany yourself with the same type of background that we had in the previous song, that long sustained drone. Or in this case, they're doing something a little bit more complex. They're playing some different notes. They're still sitting in the same scale, but they're adding a little bit more interest. And then between the verses, you could also hear that the instrument had a little bit of like a solo that it played. So that was a strong characteristic of this style of music, would be to play the melody of the song on the instrument, then sing it, then play the song on the instrument again, and kind of go back and forth. You could also play the melody on the instrument at the same time that you sung it. That was a very common way to do it. You could have two voices singing the same thing. So there were a lot of different variations they could get with this kind of single melody line, and how they embellished it with different instruments and voices. So trouvère songs, very cool. They're a nice kind of easy secular way to get into period music if you want to try accompany yourself on an instrument, because the accompaniments are very simple, and the songs are all very pretty. But you can also jazz them up. There are some trouvère songs, if you look online, you can find them like fast tempo with drums and multiple instruments. Lots of fun. Another really common kind of starting easy to get into period song is the Cantigas de Santa Maria. So the Cantigas de Santa Maria are a huge body of works that are all about the Virgin Mary, effectively. So we are going to have the similar words and themes throughout all of them. But man, some of them are bangers. They have great melodies. Like you can jam out to them on an instrument really well. So yeah, super fun. Also, this one is about a dancing pork chop, so some of them were very strange. So here we can see it's starting kind of like I said with the trouvère song we heard. It has a similar style of performance in this time period, which is that kind of 12th, 13th century, where we are going to see an instrument perform a melody line, and then we are going to have a singer come in. Here we have multiple instruments as well. So here we can see the instruments are starting to get a little bit of variation going on. We're starting to develop something more complex. We have the drums going on. This was a very period way of performing. And if you listen in the background, you can hear that the instrument is actually playing the same melody that she is singing at the same time. cantigas, cool songs, very fun.
So I just got to say this because I said it in the chat. The Dancing Pork Chop song is a bop.
Yeah,
Okay.
totally, totally is. All right. So that was kind of more of the monophonic side of things where we go from a single melody, we start to have a little bit of heterophony, we start to have some more accompaniment lines going on, and then we move into some of the more like strict, hey, we are actually writing 3 lines of music now. So for those of you that read music, you can see there's a lot of very different things happening in this song. But if you can't, you can kind of tell that we've got one singer per line. We're singing, 1, 2, 3, and then 1, 2, 3. One of them has a whole lot more going on than the other lines. So we can tell that we're going to have different rhythms. The singers are singing different things. We can hear that one of them has a much simpler line, one of them has a very complex line, and they're not really doing the same thing at the same time anywhere. This is where we're really starting to develop kind of what independent rhythms and such can do when we're writing in this polyphonic style. But at the same time, if you think about what we heard in the previous, we had a melody line being sung that was more complicated. We had an instrument that was playing along, but maybe skipping some of the notes. And we had something going on that was a drone or something sitting on a single note. So these motets are taking what was kind of being done naturally in improvised melodies and in other melodies and actually starting to write them down into, hey, instead of just having people like kind of make it up as they go along, I'm actually going to write down what I think they should do. And that's kind of how we're starting to move into this other music. And we go into even more complicated stuff with Ars Nova. So Masho is a very well-known period composer that has very complex melodies in his writing. So we can hear compared to the previous song, we had the 3 lines in the previous, and we kind of had a line doing fast stuff, a line doing medium stuff, and a line doing slow stuff. This one, we have like 2 lines doing fast stuff, a line doing medium and fast stuff, and a line doing slow stuff, but then he also kind of does fast stuff sometimes. So we're mixing a lot more elements to start creating this true polyphonic style that allows us to really get some very interesting chromaticisms. Like you can see, he does a lot with experimenting outside of the chord, which was very new in this time period. So we get some very interesting stuff. But we still kind of hear it and go, yeah, that sounds medieval, right? So that's, now we're sitting there. This has gotten us through like the 14th century at this point. So we've got like 400 years of music that we've covered here where the melody lines still kind of sound the same. Like they have a similar vibe. We're just kind of expanding on where that melody is taking us and kind of what the sound is. And some of that is because in this time period, we did a lot of composing in modes as opposed to major keys and minor keys like we do modernly. So they experimented with a lot more orders in which the notes occur and a lot more with the different tonal centers that we don't really do today, which is why a lot of medieval music has this very distinctive sound that is different from what we have modernly. So moving into a madrigal, we can see now we're getting into something we can have English. Madrigals often, instead of what we just saw, where different lines or doing different things all the time. Madrigals kind of took us all back to everybody singing the same thing at the same time, the same rhythms, but on very different notes. So we're doing chords all the way through, as opposed to kind of doing our own scattered thing. And we're starting to develop more into what we would notice as more of a choral style from today's music. Madrigals really loved our fa la las. Very, very common motif. You can find a lot of madrigals written in English. They're very fun. They're usually pretty simple to sing, especially because you don't have that kind of competing rhythm where everybody kind of has to do their own thing. So very, very fun. And then we also have our classic John Dowland lute songs. So here we have kind of a slower melodic melody on top. And the lute, instead of just doing the same melody that she's doing, which is what we heard in a lot of the earlier period of music, we hear the lute kind of starting to explore a lot of different rhythms, different melodic elements. It's doing chords underneath instead of being a single line. In our earlier music with different notes, we really don't hear a lot of full chords. That's really something we start getting in this later period of music. And then last but not least, we have some of our fun broadsides. So we get a more So here we have a very similar sound to what we saw from the melody of the lute music. This was going to be, another style of music. We start getting into broadsides kind of very late in the period. And the reason they are called broadside ballads is that this is basically music that was written on like a single sheet of paper and sold really cheaply. And it continued this way for many, many years. We get broadsides going into the 17th and 18th century. This is just a type of song that was sold to the common folks for cheap. So this is music that's going to be much more accessible to people of all stations, as opposed to being something reserved purely for the upper class. Because as we go into, our history, traditionally, you did music when you were either like the full-time minstrel, musician, or you were rich enough to have enough time to learn to play an instrument. And so your everyday people who were working, 12 hours a day did not have time to learn to play an instrument. So instrumental music was very much reserved for those who had enough money. And this is now starting to bring more music to kind of the common folk as we start getting these more accessible secular songs. So that's kind of our whirlwind tour through the sound of period music. So we can talk about how is that different from what we do in modern SCA music. So we'll bounce back to the what is Bardic type question. So first, we have kind of two main aspects of Bardic. The core is storytelling. Even when you are singing a song, you are storytelling. So Bardic is focused on telling the tales. When we get people who are actually doing stories in a circle or at Bardic, these stories often tend to be more likely to be actual period stories. They tend to be more historically based. A lot of times that's just where we find stories. What are the stories that we think about? We think about the stories of mythology. We think about the stories of the gods. We think about folklore. A lot of this all goes back to period. So these same stories that we hear growing up as children are the same stories that have been passed down from period. There is a lot of story out there. There's a lot of lore to pull for storytelling. Because we've had so many of these stories passed through oral tradition or showing up in sagas. We know all about Norse mythology because they wrote that shit down. But there's a lot you can do with storytelling, and there's a lot of elements you can bring into storytelling that make your listeners interested. So when we hear stories within the SCA, even if they are modern stories, they often will use some elements of period stories. So someone might actually write a poem to tell their story in verse. Most of our period stories started out in verse. They also are likely to use kind of repeating lines or repeating elements. These are things that get people to play along and involved, so they know that they're going to have a certain type of pacing, and allows them to kind of buy into the story. So meter and verse can make these stories easier to remember for the storyteller, but repeating lines and repeating elements make things easier on the audience to feel involved in the story. And there's a lot of different ways you can go with this. But a lot of people think Bardic in the SCA and they think of just people singing songs. But at its core, Bardic is actually storytelling more so than the song. And storytelling is actually where we find more historical basis compared to our composition of modern songs. So just because you can't sing, it does not mean you can't be a bard. There's a lot of bardic out there. When you're thinking about storytelling, the biggest thing, if you want to get into storytelling, is to find a story you think is interesting and engaging, and to figure out how you can tell it succinctly. So figuring out what are the beats of the story, what are the elements that I need to hit to make this story make sense, what are the lines I need to say, and figuring out how you can fit that into a short period of time. Some stories are hard to do, and that doesn't mean that they're bad stories. It doesn't mean you shouldn't tell those stories, but that's where we do techniques such as, I'm going to tell you half the story during my turn at the circle, and then I'll say, and to hear the rest, you'll have to wait for my next turn, which gets people to stick around so they can hear the end of your story. And this allows you to tell a larger repertoire of stories while still kind of fitting within the 5-minute time limit that most people want for Bardic, because let's face it, nobody has a very long attention span. So if you're going over 5 minutes, you're probably losing people in your story, unfortunately. Okay, so storytelling, poetry, very historical, very good. Music in Bardic. A lot of what we have in SCA Bardic is based on folk song or traditional works, as I said. We've got broadside ballads, we've got the child ballads or the road index if you want to look up some earlier songs. Some of these songs we can trace back to period. Some of them we can get close to period. Some of them we can go, yeah, I could see how it's period. But some folk songs are definitely not. Like there's a lot of Irish revival songs that are very, very common in the SCA. Sometimes it's very obvious that these are not period. They tell the dates. If it is 1800 and something, it's a great song, but it's definitely not period. That doesn't mean you can't sing it in the SCA, but if someone asks you for a period song, that's not quite the appropriate time for that one. Sea shanties are a big influence on us. Lots of Ren Fair songs are a big influence on us. Mostly in the SCA now. In the early days of the SCA, you found a lot more of kind of the Irish trad revival, the sea shanties, those types of songs, because when the SCA started, we were in that revival period. The 50s through the 70s is when this Irish music was making a big comeback. So it was kind of easy. And a lot of it has enough of a medieval vibe that you can get away with singing it. Um, and so that's how it became so popular within the SCA. But we also started writing our own modern SCA folk songs. And now, if you go to a Bardic circle, you are going to predominantly find modern SCA songs that are written either about the SCA, about the SCA's history, or songs that they write to talk about historical events or based on historical stories. So we are not hearing as many actual period songs or historical works at a Bardic circle. There are people who do exclusively period songs at Bardic circles. No one's ever going to tell you that's wrong. If they do, kindly tell them to come chat with me. Please do period songs at Bardic circles. It's great. But you don't have to. So there's a lot of other places we can get our music. So I'll talk about this real quick. If you're to kind of cover our Bardic basics, if you want to get into Bardic, the most common place you're going to get started is a Bardic circle. A Bardic circle is any group of people doing Bardic things together. It does not have to be a circle. It could be a cluster in a tent because it is cold outside. It could be you and your friend doing Bardic, whatever you want to be. If you are in a circle environment around a fire or otherwise, there are kind of two main ways people will play. One could be referred to as popcorn or chaos or pop up. And this means that there is no performance order. You just stand up and start singing when you feel so inspired. A lot of people don't like this style of circle because they have to compete for, like, oh, I want to go, but oh, someone beat me. Oh, I want to go, but someone, sometimes it can be harder for people who are quieter or shy to kind of claim the spotlight there. So it is good etiquette to not be a circle hog. Make sure that most of the circle has gone before you go again. What I do in chaos circles is I tend to perform after somebody, and I pay attention to the 3 people that sang before me, and I don't sing until at least 2 of them have sung again. That way, we're giving everybody an opportunity. If you're in a chaos circle and you see somebody who's having a struggle to get up and perform, they want to and they can't, help them out. Shout out. If you're a loud person, shout out and tell people, hey, this person wants to go. If it's a chaos circle, a lot of times having a circle moderator helps. A lot of circles will have somebody who is kind of in charge. They're the ones that started it. It's their camp. They put the invite up on the website. They're going to decide what rule we are using, and it is usually on this person to encourage people to perform. So occasionally they may stop the circle and say, all right, I want to give an opportunity for anyone who hasn't had a chance to perform yet to, kind of queue up so you have an opportunity if you're struggling. They also are going to tell people, like, what are the rules of the circle. If they notice that somebody is trying to stand up to go, stop the circle, let them go. The other most common circle type is pick, pass, or play. That means every single person in the circle is going to get a turn. We're going to go in order. And you are going to either pick a song for the circle to sing, for a specific performer to sing, pick a performer. I could say, hey, I want Charlotte to do something. I don't care what it is. I could say, hey, I want Charlotte to do this specific song. I could say, hey, does anybody know X song that I like? Or you could say, I kind of want to sing this song, but I don't know it well enough. Does anyone else know it well enough to lead it so I can sing along? Any of those is totally fine. You can play, so you can do your own thing. You can start a song. Or you can just say, I'm just here to watch and listen, and that's totally fine. You can pass it to the next person. Yeah, chaos circles can be very anxiety inducing if you struggle to kind of, put yourself out there. Even me, I don't prefer chaos circles if they're large, because I just feel like they make a lot of people uncomfortable. So if you are singing with me, unless it's like a very small amount of people, we're probably doing pick, pass, or play. It's just easier that way. And then kind of the other big thing is if you want to chat or socialize with your friends, just get up out of your chair, take a few steps behind the circle and do your socializing there. Try not to socialize very much in the circle. Some other little things is like, if it's your turn and it's coming, have an idea of what you want to perform already. Don't wait for it to be your turn and then say, oh, let me open my book and flip through for 5 minutes and try to decide. Try to have an idea. Sometimes it's fun to be like, do you want to hear a sad song or a happy song? And then you know which two those were and you go. But try not to kind of slow things down by flipping through. And then I have a bunch of Bardic resources here that I can just post in the chat for anybody who's looking for, where do I find music? Where do I find lyrics? How can I learn songs? All of these are good places to get started. The YouTube channels, you can hear thousands and thousands of people performing songs. There are thousands of videos. Callan Song and Midbards both have a lot of songbooks. There's a Bardic Arts research page. This has some things such as like, what is Bardic and how do I sing? SCA Bardic Fun is the site that I run primarily to do Pennsic and Gulf Wars, and we put Bardic circles on the calendar there. So if you are going to one of those wars and you want to know if there's a Bardic circle tonight, go to bardic.fun, and if I know of it, it'll be there. There's also some other resources there. So that's my how to do it. Now we talked about kind of what do we hear in songs about period songs. So I also put together a slide of like, what are some types of songs we hear in the SCA? And there's a lot of things. We could have songs explicitly about the SCA. We could have songs about things that happened in the SCA, a specific battle or war. We can sing about a historical event or battle. We can base our song on a period story or song or book or play. We can use period lyrics to write our own music to create a song. We can write modern kingdom war songs or anthems about our kingdom. We can basically write our own story set in the medieval time period. We can make our own folklore. We can also just sing songs that have like a medieval, historic, witchy vibe. Sometimes it's just about the vibe. Does the vibe break you out of this feels like it belongs at an SCA event? We usually say songs, for a lot of things, competitions sung in the SCA should be SCA or medieval-ish. If it doesn't have anything intrusively modern, you're probably good to go ahead and sing it. No one's gonna tell you no. When I run a circle and people are, especially if people are new and they may not know a lot of songs, I am totally fine if someone wants to sing a Disney song. Like, whatever makes people comfortable and gets them involved is a good thing in my world. So I can post these. This is by no means an exhaustive list. This is just me thinking up different categories of songs and trying to come up with ideas of them. So, for example, like this is a really old school. This gets into more Bardic history.
Now the deadly widow spider eats the mate that doesn't flee, as does the praying mantis if she's courted carelessly. Don't be fooled by fragile beauty, for thereby hangs my tale, that the ladies in the SCA are deadly as the male.
So that's kind of like the genre of, we are talking about being in the SCA. So this is not a song about being medieval. This is a song about we are in the SCA. We are doing something. Any song that we're singing, like Vivat the Dream, or anything that is explicitly calling out kind of the organization, totally valid within the SCA. But it's going to be a very different vibe than, something like this, that is a song based on Canterbury Tales.
Three roisterers, three drinking men were sharing of a glass, but pausing in their revels when a funeral chanced to pass. Then one of their good host inquired, "Innkeeper, can you tell for what poor beggar late expired?" They told the funeral bell.
So we've already kind of heard very different vibes there. And again, very different ideas, whether we're singing about the SCA or we're singing about, period songs and stories. That is a fantastic album, by the way. If you like the Canterbury Tales, they wrote songs based on different stories within the Canterbury Tales. Fantastic. I don't have time to go over all of these, so I'll just take the last 5 minutes for like throw your questions at me. What do you want to know before we wrap up? I can, yeah.
Okay, so I have a super quick question.
Yes.
The Bard off at Gulf Wars, what does that entail?
All right, who's seen Pitch Perfect? Because that is basically what the Bard off is. It is the sing off. So the idea of the Bard off was Gulf Wars used to have the War Bard. Well, Gulf Wars still has a War Bard competition, which is 20 bards compete, one walks away as the winner. That used to be the War Point when it was first created, like 15-ish years ago. At some point, the Bardic War Point went away because all of the war points are at the Crown's discretion. So 2 years ago, they decided to add a Bardic War Point back. They did not want to use the War Bard competition as the war point, and they wanted to come up with something different. They wanted it to be something that was done in an hour, which is very hard if you are dealing with performers, because as we know, in an hour you might get through 10 performances. If they're long, you might get through less. If they're really long, you might get through more if they're short. But there's a lot of people who might want to participate, and we wanted to make sure we created something that was open to every person who wanted to come and participate. So we designed it kind of more for the bards than we did for the war point, because let's be real, we just want to party and have fun. So the idea of the Bardic War Point is that there are effectively 3 rounds. The teams, there is a team for each alliance, run by the primary kingdoms. If you are not in one of the primary kingdoms, you may get red rovered to the other side, because the only kind of strict rule we have is that the sides need to be even in order to make it the most fair. So sometimes people may compete against their kingdom. Usually people are fine with that as long as they get to play, but it's better than saying, no, you can't, because the other team only has 5 bards and you have 10. So basic idea, each team will come up with a topic that they want to challenge the other team. So the topic cannot be broad. We can't just say war songs, because there's like a zillion of them. So the topic may need to be war songs with horses. So now we have a more limited pool of songs to pull from. And you then have to perform at least 30 seconds of a song, but no more than 2 minutes of the song. And we actually might reduce that to 90 seconds next year. But you have to perform at least 30 seconds, no more than 2 minutes of a song, and the part of the song you sing must include the topic. So if you sing the wrong verse of the song and I never hear you talk about horses, that does not match the category, and your team has to perform again. So it basically goes back and forth between the 2 teams, each one doing a war song with a horse, the other team a war song with a horse, back and forth. And every person on the team needs to go before you can go again. So we also have a limit to, like, one person can't just showboat because they know 12 songs about horses. They have to give someone else an opportunity to go. And if your team as a whole doesn't have enough repertoire, then you're not going to be able to be as competitive. So we basically go back and forth like that in the categories, and it's whichever team has the most songs wins. If you ever get to the point where a team says we don't have anything else, that's the end. Stories and poems are also valid in this competition. So sometimes we've had people make up a story on the spot, which totally fine with us. So it's a lot of fun. If you are going to Gulf Wars, definitely plan to come out and participate next year. This year we did the tiebreaker category was songs about heralds that were not funny, because I could only think of like one. And then one of the teams from Trimaris, I was very proud of them. they pulled out a Song of the Shield Wall where it talks about Harold Hardrada's gone over the sea. I didn't specify the spelling of Harold, so I had to let it through. It was not my intention, but that's what they did. So anyway, that is the Bard off at Gulf Wars. It's super fun. Definitely come out and play with us if you have not had an opportunity. And if you're interested in the stealing that format, please feel free. I can send you the rules. Just reach out to me. Would be happy to see.
Incredible. Yeah, so we had another question come in from Sid. How about strictly instrumental? They mentioned that they don't sing as well as they play.
Strictly instrumental, totally fine in a bardic circle. Go for it. I've definitely had people play instrumental at circle before. Also, depending on what instruments you play, you could also team up with a friend and work on a duo. So kind of whichever you're good with. I would say the biggest thing about being instrumental is making sure you know what you want to play, so you don't kind of hold things up, or you if you're like improvising, make sure you have a good sense of how long you're going, because you still want to fall within kind of those normal time limits that we have for kind of a normal bardic piece. Usually we say like bardic circles, you want to be closer to 3 minutes. If you're telling a story, like maybe you can go to 5, but really nothing at a bardic circle should go over the 5-minute mark. You're just going to lose the attention of people. But things that are more in that 3 to 4 minute mark are usually optimal.
Absolutely. Yeah, any other questions in the short time that we have left for Mistress Aibhilin? Don't be shy, you can ask in chat or feel free to unmute as well.
If anyone has questions, I'm gonna stop sharing here. If anyone has questions or needs resources or needs help finding a song, you want to learn a song about a specific topic or anything like that, feel free to reach out to me on Facebook. And I'm happy to help you find what you need, find what you are interested in, direct you to resources. If you want instrumental resources, I can send you instrumental resources as well. There's a lot out there, and as I said, Bardic Basics is a very broad topic, so I kind of tried to hit a little bit on everything. So we've got a little bit of history, a little bit of Bardic, a little bit of what you can do. So yeah, if anything you want more information on, just reach out to me and I'm happy to send you down a rabbit hole.
And are they able to reach out to you on your personal Facebook account? Is that okay?
That's fine. Bethany Rollings. Ping me. I'll put it in chat.
Wonderful, yes. And if it wasn't clear to everybody already in this session, Mistress Aibhilin, aka Bethany, is a just fountain of information, just burgeoning constantly with new information and new ideas on Bardic, specifically in the SCA. So
Bardic Basics. What do we want to know, guys? Yes, the Siren song, I'm on My Way, is a song that we wrote. It was originally, Matthias wrote the Siren song, which is the second part of that. And then we had an idea about what if we wrote kind of a combo. And so I wrote most of I'm on My Way. He wrote the chorus, and then I wrote kind of all the verses, and we tweaked things a little bit to make them fit together. So we have fun with that one. Yeah, that one, it's the only sad part is it's really hard to perform without both of us, because it just doesn't hit as hard or as well when you don't have the two voices to get the transition between the two parts. So
I do have one more question just before I know that you're busy and we don't want to take up too much more of your time. If you wanted to encourage people to participate in Bardic circles more and not have it be quite so scary, because again, in our culture, I feel like lots of times performing music is kind of going away. Like we hear other people perform it all the time, and a lot of people are very nervous. What would you recommend that we say to them to help encourage them to feel more comfortable in participating in Bardic?
that's a topic that has been discussed all over the known world.
Sure.
From everyone. It really depends on the person, right?
Mhm.
As to what they want to hear, the best kind of first step we can take is we'll just come listen and then maybe sing along.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons why, if I do have someone who's new to Bardic or new to the SCA and they're interested, if they want to sing something, I don't care what it is. You can sing me a pop song, you can sing me a Disney song.
Yeah.
If you want to get up and sing something, go for it. If you're like, I only kind of maybe know a little bit of Wellerman, I will jump right in there and start singing Wellerman so you can sing along. If there's a song that they like, the best kind of first step is to sing with a buddy, sing a song that the whole circle is singing. A lot of people, their kind of first picks that they'll do, to play themselves is they'll say, I'd like to sing this song. Can we sing it as a circle? I'm too shy to sing by myself. That's totally fine. Like, it doesn't have to be a solo performance. It doesn't have to be a performance at all. You can sit in your chair and close your eyes, and that's fine. Like, if that's what you need to do to break the ice. So really it's just anything you can say to tell someone you are under no obligation to sing. Please feel free to join us. If at any point you want to sing, please do. And that's one of the benefits of doing like a pick, pass, or play circle, is that we're going to give them an opportunity each time. We're going to say, would you like to do anything? Is there anything you can pick a topic or pick a song you want to hear? All of these are going to be ways to kind of help get kind of that over the hump. But I think a lot of it is making sure that people know, first of all, it is not just about singing. If you're not comfortable singing, you can still participate in Bardic. You can recite a Shakespeare sonnet. You can do a haiku. Like, I know someone who did their first Bardic performance and it was a haiku. They got up 15 syllables or 17 syllables and they sat down and it was like, yay, that's great, right? So our entry point can be anything. A lot of times a good entry point for people, especially if they're people who've been in the SCA for a while, but maybe haven't engaged with Bardic before and they're kind of trying it out because someone strong-armed them into coming. Shit, there I was story. Everybody's got a story of something they saw, something they did. Tell me about your first event. Tell me about your first feast. We can help kind of give prompts of like, well, you could tell us something that you've done. Tell me how you learned to make your first garb. Like, what's a cool historical fact or story that you like? What's a battle you really like to talk about from period? What can you tell me about it? All of this is Bardic. All of this is storytelling. When you're just having a conversation with somebody and they're telling you about this one time they did a thing, you're doing Bardic right there. So creating that connection of everything is Bardic. If you are telling about your experiences, you are already doing Bardic. Doing it at a circle is just now doing it with more people listening than just your conversation partner. So really, Bardic is a conversation between all of us. We're all participating. We're all tuning in. We're all listening. Yeah, anything can be Bardic. You just have to do it at a circle. You don't even have to do it at a circle, but anything you do at a circle is absolutely Bardic.
Love that so much. Well, thank you again so much for your wealth of information, Mistress Aibhilin. I'm going to be posting this video for anybody who had connection issues coming in and out of Zoom, but I want to give a big round of applause, either virtually or in person, for Mistress Aibhilin for being here for us. Truly so much information in one tiny little packed hour. I'm amazed at how much you were able to cover.
I say happy to give more info on anything people want to know, talk more about. Feel free to message me.
Yep, and I'll be sharing all the resources that you shared. One last question. Will you be able to share your slides with us so that we can put them on the group as well?
Sure.
Okay.
Let me make a link.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you again, everybody, for joining us. I'll be sure to post those resources on the group and the event page. And if you want me to private message you, I can do that too. And we'll be posting the recording of this shortly. So thank you again so much.